Welcome back to another episode, all. Throughout this episode, I'm going to take a look at an apologetic by applied behaviour analysis of where we talk about good ABA and bad ABA. I'm going to be listening to a doctor, Mary Barbera, as she's called, who's supposed to be a behaviour analyst, according to her channel. And I'm going to respond to her claims about what is good ABA as she says it. So I haven't seen the video that we're going to watch. So I'm coming into this with no awareness yet. So if you just allow me to share my screen. Right. Let's get started.
You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 146. Today, I had a great conversation with Tamika Meadows, who is a board-certified behavior analyst who resides in Atlanta, Georgia. She has nearly 2 decades of experience providing ABA in schools, homes, clinics, and she is the creator-author of a blog called iloveaba.com, which is accessed daily by thousands of people all over the world, including myself. And I started looking at that blog about a decade ago. So today we talk about good ABA versus bad ABA, how to spot really quality programs, is home or school ABA better, and a host of other issues, but that's the gist of it. It was a great conversation. Hope you love it as much as I did. Let's get to this special interview with Tamika Meadows. So Tamika, it is so great to meet you and have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So this is my first interview where the interviewee is in a car, and you said
yes.
You don't have great internet connection in your house, so you actually went somewhere and you're in your car. You look great.
Thank you.
So anyway, we like to start the same way, and I don't know the answer to the story at all, but describe your fall into the autism world.
Sure. Well, I had a bit of a accidental entry. Like some, I was a college student on campus. I saw a flyer that I assumed was for babysitting. And so I responded. I went out, I met the mom and her child, and got a very kind of quick synopsis of what they were doing, this therapy, autism, because at the time I did not know what that was. I did not know what ABA was. I'd never heard of it. And she showed me a few video clips of him during session. And I was just like, what is this? And how do I be a part of this? Because this is way more interesting than what I'm learning in class. And that was pretty much my thought going in. And I started working with that one family, and then started seeing other families, started getting recommendations.
Right, so up to now, apparently she knows nothing about autism, and she's already fallen into the world of ABA. That's where I mentioned about ABA's great lack of education. They're not actually educated about autism, but they're actually going in as school children, as 18-year-olds. Is it actually a good idea to put disabled children, as autistic kids often do have other disabilities besides their autism? Should we really just shove them in the hands of people who don't even know about the disability? This is one of the ethical problems I see with ABA, is how unqualified the therapists actually are, and it's actually more of some kind of work experience rather than people actually learning what they need to know first. So it's no wonder that abuse still goes on in ABA, while we're still getting reports of abuse and harm.
And then it reached a point where I had a specific consultant who was working with us say to me, you know, you really should look into this as like a career. Like, I think you'd like it. I think you take to it very well. And I was like, wait, this is like a career? And she sent me to the BACB website, and that was it. I looked into the process for getting certified, went to grad school, and here we are. So
Wow.
I very much fell in.
Yeah. And that is a very common pattern for parents. It's their child was diagnosed. For professionals like yourself, it is a lot of times answering an ad high school or college and getting hooked by working with one child.
And just loving it and saying, I want to do this all the time.
So working with one child, they're entering the field, no experience with autism, no experience with autistic children, but they suddenly see some banner saying, oh, come and help the autistic ones, then they think they are qualified already to actually understand autistic people, to understand how we process the world. How disgraceful is that? How is that good, ABA?
How do I make that happen? Yeah.
So I'm excited because you're a behavior analyst, as I am, and you have a blog called iloveaba.com, which is, I've been following it for years. What year did you create that?
Oh gosh, I want to say 2011, but don't hold me to that, but that sounds right.
Yeah. So it is pretty visited a lot. It has a lot of traffic to that iloveaba.com site. So today we're going to talk about good ABA, bad ABA.
Yes.
Versus full ABA.
Yes.
Answering questions that I get all the time. Why do some people hate ABA? Is ABA abuse? I mean, just the whole gamut that, unfortunately, even if you are a listener out there, and we think we have about 70% parents out there listening and about 30%.
Are you constantly overwhelmed with your workload? Look at this schedule. Perfectly organized, managed, with every task completed on time.
Sorry about this.
Professionals, but even if you're a parent with a child with a new diagnosis, unfortunately, you've probably heard there is controversy around
100%. I mean, it would be hard not to, I would say, to have never heard anything negative. I think would be kind of hard.
Right. So why is that, Tamiko?
Yeah, why exactly is it so hard to have never heard anything negative about ABA? If you actually check out my video, Applied Behaviour Analysis Episode 2, about early below bars, you'll find that all the way from the beginning, ABA was just a scandal. It was just a money scam. Early below bars, an immigrant all the way from Norway just after World War II. You'll find me explain that in the episode about early below bars. He studied under Skinner, and he actually chose to intentionally contradict B.F. Skinner and just do it for the sake of testing his own theories about autism. He wasn't actually interested in helping autistic kids, but once his own theories were discredited or leave low bars, he decided to take it up as a money-making opportunity instead. And this money-making opportunity is still ongoing this day. I can safely assume, even though I haven't gone through this yet, since ABA is the behaviourist approach, I can safely assume we're going to hear a lot of behaviorism. And since ABA never does longitudinal studies, I can safely assume they're not going to share with you what psychologists actually say about the long-term results. Since ABA doesn't do random group research design, I can say that it's not going to be objective evidence that they're going to talk about. So I don't even know if they're going to bring the evidence up or not, because as it said, they're talking about good ABA, bad ABA. But really, ABA always is the behaviourist approach, and using the behaviourist approach on people as a therapy always will be bad. It will never be good for us. It's unhealthy by its nature. So there never will be good ABA. Either a paradigm shift is needed, and we've got to stop going by, oh, ABA and change the name of it if the therapy has actually changed?
Why is there controversy and people that think ABA is abuse?
I really think that it's a very diverse group of people who tend to be against ABA, tend to speak out very loudly online, on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever. I do not think there is a kind of unified reason for it. I see a lot of different reasons. I see a lot of different perspectives. Sometimes these are people who received services and those services were awful. Those services had no respect of the dignity of the individual. Sometimes it's people who, for them, their autism is not disabling. It is not something they view as a disorder. So they don't understand why there's an entire industry built on giving therapy to young children. They don't get it. They think.
Next, how she just mentioned industry. If you just allow me to turn to one of the books on the right, because I had the feeling this was going to come up, and I had the idea of sharing this with you anyway about ABA, by Professor Alicia Broderick, The Autism Industrial Complex. I'm just going to read what someone called Elizabeth B. Torres, the director of the New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence, had to say when she read this book in advance. As I mentioned, ABA is a money scam. Elizabeth B. Torres, PhD and professor and computational neuroscientist, says, I quote, "Autism is at an inflection point today. We are poised for a paradigm shift in autism research, education, and therapies. This book initiates that shift and does so superbly. In the autism industrial complex, how branding, marketing, and capital investment turned autism into big business, we learn about the history and evolution of this multi-billion-dollar per year operation. Thanks to this history, we'll remember love as, ABA, and behaviorism in general, not as a science, but as a branding, rhetoric, and marketing plot that transiently misguided many well-intended parents and professionals, and that in so doing profited with greed by preying on our human hopes, our trust in science, and our fears." End of quote. Yeah, I would strongly recommend, if you want to know about the money scam, do check out Professor Alicia Broderick's book, The Autism Industrial Complex. Now let's carry on.
I think it's wrong. There's a lot of different reasons and viewpoints. You even have people in the field, like myself, who really want to see ABA step forward and grow and advance and get better. And, we want to see our ethics get better, and we want to see the way we do things change and evolve. So it's a diverse issue. It's a weighty issue. There's a lot of feelings involved. People are very emotionally invested. And I can't imagine, as a parent, trying to navigate all of that to make a decision for your child. It must be so confusing and scary of just, okay, but what do we do? Because there's all these different voices, but they're all just as passionate. So what do we do? I can't imagine how hard that is.
Right. Because ABA, applied behavior analysis, was back when my son Lucas was diagnosed 2 decades ago, was and still is the most evidence-based treatment for children with autism.
Correct.
A direct lie right there. ABA therapy doesn't even have evidence. ABA as a therapy, as I've mentioned, they do not do longitudinal studies. They do not do random group research designs. They are caught in publication bias. About 80% of the cases in their journals are at conflict of interest. And what they do today, since they keep claiming we don't do what we did in the past, this already refutes their claim that it's evidence-based. Because if it was evidence-based, that would mean they'd have to be doing what they were doing to obtain the evidence. Meaning that, where they say we've got 50 years evidence, 50 years evidence that doing shock therapy on kids, 50 years evidence that conversion therapy on kids was working. So the confessing here, all their so-called evidence is based on conversion therapy, but we're going to make the exact opposite claim, say, we're not doing conversion therapy. When they say, oh, we don't do shock therapy, that's a direct lie. The Judge Rottenberg Centre, all the BCBAs there, including these two, are credentialed by the BACB, Behaviour Analyst Certification Board. And all of them at the Judge Rottenberg Centre giving electronic shocks to kids with intellectual disability are all BCBAs, part of ABA. So shock therapy still is ABA. Aversives still are used. So what if there's fewer places doing electroconvulsive therapy? That is still part of ABA. But these guys like to deny that all those who work for ABA just because they individually don't do it. But it's still part of ABA.
And it is all now, all 50 states are required to provide insurance coverage, and then you get, well, if autism is a gift and it's not a disorder, why are we treating?
Why are we treating it? Why does it need treatment?
And so it is really hard for parents, I'm sure, to wade through the controversy. I mean, they just want to help their child.
Right.
And when they get... just a quick question to Nat. Why is the controversy to begin with? That's a good question to ask. Why is the controversy to begin with? If this is so-called evidence-based, so safe, why on earth is the controversy to begin with? Ask yourselves.
Get all that overload, which
Are you a woman in your 40s or 50s who've been trying to lose weight for the past few years now, but everything you've tried has been failing since reaching menopause?
Lucas was diagnosed, it was 1999. There was no Facebook. There was barely
Correct.
So I didn't know back then when I started ABA that there was any controversy. I had no idea. And even when I started in the online world, it wasn't as loud.
Agreed. Yeah.
Same. And now it's getting...
It's very different.
It's
very different.
Getting louder.
Yes.
And
the reason it's getting louder and louder is because of the money scam. Still this day, it is a big industry for profiteering. You'll find that as soon as they leave the so-called treatment, that's it. Parents struggle to find help anymore for their kids. As soon as ABA can't make money out of the kids anymore, that's it. No support whatsoever. Because they only want the money. That's what the BACB, the leaders. So the individual therapists, like perhaps these two, they may be compassionate about it, may be passionate and actually want to help. But those who are in charge up at the top, because this is more like a pyramid scheme. It's just like a cult, ABA. The whole thing, but such as where you've just heard these two saying, oh, we want our ethics to improve. So if the therapists want the ethics to improve, that means they've got objections, right? But what do we find them doing? They get told to swallow their objections, and that's how cults work. That's the behavior of a cult, not the behavior of a science. Science would be willing to move on, not just swallow objections, but they would actually protest. So they would use the autistic people, ourselves. So if it's those in ABA objecting, what's the reason to doubt the autistic people objecting? Why not take our voice as reason to change the ethics, to improve the ethics? Why are we ignoring our voice, our support? Why ignore it? Because they ignore every single part for the sake of the money. They are in direct association with Autism Speaks, an autism hate group that still has the goals of eugenics. But they are still part of the Judge Rotenberg Centre, giving shock therapy on kids. Since they're allowed to do that, the BCB, that shows it is not against their ethics code. It is not unethical, according to them, to give shocks to children and cause PTSD permanently and permanent psychological damage. So if they don't change, if they don't stop just swallowing their objections, we're going to maintain bad ABA. Because the other individual, Tamika Meadows, said, "Oh, I want the ethics to improve." Yeah, that's what autistic people are demanding. They want the ethics to improve. So this illustrates that the ethics are not improving, but there certainly is things that need to be improved. So how can they go saying, oh, there's no abuse in ABA, there's no harms? How can they go saying that when we're confessing here that there's a great lack in ethics?
And really what I'm trying to do, and I think, I don't know you well, but I know your work on I Love ABA, and what we're trying to do is help each child reach his or her fullest potential.
Right.
And whether that includes going on to still have moderate to severe autism and have, problems communicating.
That's where I mentioned about on a separate episode about there's no such thing as severe autism, mild autism, or moderate autism. They are put as level 1, 2, and 3. Indicating support needs, not indicating severity levels. So, two professional BCBAs who have had 2 decades in this field of being so-called autism experts, but they don't even understand autism still. And they said they've graduated. And to be a BCBA, that's 2 years education at least. 2 years education for ABA, and you still don't understand autism. How is that ethical, this lack of education?
Communicating and having, that's fine, but we're going to work to see if we can help the child catch up in terms of language and self-care.
Improvement.
And really,
for quality of life.
And the earlier you start that, the better.
Actually, no, not the earlier you start that, the better. Actually, the earlier you start it, the worse it will turn out to be. Because ABA is all about bribes and threats altogether, about manipulation, that the kids are in some state where they are more susceptible, that they will be exploited against their own will altogether. The younger they start it at, because they can't give consent to what these people are going to do to them, since they don't even understand autism, they don't know how autistic people experience the world, they ignore all the scientific discoveries from alternative disciplines, such as when it comes to these things called special interest, as some people call them, that's the keystone. That's the key way to helping autistic people learn in their learning. Such as in studies which have been done in autism research, what we come to find on some of the neuroimaging is that there was a girl, for example, who at a school, they tried integrating their special interest into the curriculum in New York. And what this particular study did was they made separate classes for 3 autistic individuals of what that individual was interested in. And usually these individuals didn't have the ability to speak very well, though very just little phrases like that. Just yeah, no, not very complex statements, but just little phrases like that. So by basing these groups on their interest, when it came to shared interests, what we came to find was that the so-called autism traits just vanished. They were not stimming as much. They were making more eye contact. They were making more communication and interaction. All the so-called deficits just seem to have vanished when basing it on their special interest. They socialized and communicated more. So a shared interest is one of the best ways. The girl I mentioned, she was in school and couldn't read. Couldn't read at all. But what the teachers did as they integrated their interest in, they asked the parents to read a book with them about their interest. And as they did so, just 2 months later, the individual was able to read books that they learned through halfway through grade 2 within just 2 months. That was great progression. And when they tested this on neuroimaging, what they found was when they showed individuals, autistic kids, pictures about their interest while inside the MRI scan, it activated language regions. And this seems to be the way that autistic people are learning to communicate. So you don't want to be doing manipulation. You don't want to be doing bribes and threats. Let them learn their natural way. Accept that there's more than one way to learn. And that would help them learn greatly.
There was just an article that came out just this week, which said that one study is showing that parent-led therapy, as soon as you have a child with delays, parent-led therapy is showing real improvements. And then I just heard somebody on the severe autism group say, oh, now we're back to blaming the mothers for not engaging the child.
Yeah,
right.
Back to the 50s. Yeah, which is not, I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say confusion, but misunderstanding. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what the intent and goal and purpose of intervention should be. I agree with anyone who is saying the focus should not be to remove autism. Agreed. I agree with you. That should not be the focus, but everyone's autism is different. We can all agree with that. It is not a monolith. So one person's experience of autism does not mean you get to now speak for every single person's experience of autism. And so for other people who don't.
Now we're getting direct false accusations here. When autistic people speak against ABA, they are not talking about someone's autism. They are talking about ABA, behaviorism. As Elizabeth B. Torres said, a neuroscientist. Notice, she's not a behaviorist. She's a neuroscientist. Not one science discipline outside of ABA supports ABA. Not one. I challenge you, if you're a supporter of ABA, find one study that supports ABA done by a science discipline that does not work for ABA. And, whether you're a parent or whether you're actually an ABA worker. Because there was a report recently by a team called Psychological Bulletin. They actually went in and looked at all the literature of ABA. And they concluded that ABA is not even worthy of being included in a data analysis to see the quality of the therapy, of the science. That said it's so poorly conducted that it's not even worthy to be analysed. They saw numerous failures to report harm, numerous failures to resolve conflict of interest, numerous failures of group research designs, only single case research designs. No attention to what goes on in the process of the intervention, just the beginning and the end, which is very problematic.
Don't have a consistent means of communication. They don't have the ability to use a bathroom by themselves, which is like a human right, to not need people in the bathroom with you. For people who are not having an experience like you, can you at least see that they could use some help, some supports, some resources? Their family probably could.
Yes, Tamika, autistic people certainly can see that. Why do you think we are saying ensure DIR floor time, ensure the skirts model, ensure music therapy, ensure occupational therapy, ensure the other therapies? Why do you think we are saying that? Do you think we're saying that because we think, oh, they don't need any help? So you've pretty much been very contradictory to straightforward there, Tamika, Meadows. And that's, I don't know how you come to that conclusion that we're claiming they don't need help. No, we're saying they don't need abuse from ABA. That they don't need conversion therapy as what you originally are. We're saying that you need to pay attention more to their emotions, their emotional well-being, their physiology, their biology, their neurology. But you love to work in such an isolated state that you ignore the neurology, that you cause neurological harm. You ignore the physiology, that you cause physiological harm. You ignore biology, that you cause biological damage in the gut, in the nervous system, and it communicates with the rest of the body, harming other parts of the body. You only use the naked eye. We know how dangerous that is. So why not integrate the 21st century scientific discoveries? Why not integrate autism research into the interventions? Why must you be so isolated and uneducated about all these other fields and discoveries which are so promising to make a better intervention? That is what we are asking. We want a better intervention, not ABA from the 1950s, where just, oh, do this and we'll give you this reward. Oh, if you don't do that, oh, we won't give you it. Any idiot can do that. It doesn't take a professional to bribe a child. So what's the point of hiring an ABA therapist when all you do is bribe and threat? So, clearly you can see that ABA therapists often don't need to make false accusations against the autistic community, protesting against ABA and behaviorism, and even the other scientists of other scientific disciplines protesting against it, pointing out that there's ethical issues by ignoring the biology, causing harm, and apparently the number one rule is do not harm. But they were intentionally harming by ignoring all the physiology and just being so isolated that I don't know how we can ignore it. Let's continue.
Could use some help. Their teachers probably could use some help. That should be the goal of intervention, is to come in and to say, okay, where do we need help? Where do we need more support? Where is this individual getting so frustrated and so angry because they don't have a way to let people know what they want and what they need? Not to come in and say, let's make you quote unquote normal. That should not be the goal. And I agree with anyone who says that. But unfortunately, I think that's where the conversation stops. And I would love to see the conversation continue so we can really start talking to each other about how do we make this better for everyone participating in this treatment, instead of just kind of attacking it. Let's talk about, okay, what do we need to improve? What do we need to do different? How do we listen to autistic voices? Like, let's engage instead of like battling. I just feel like battling doesn't really help anybody.
Tamika, we have been engaging with you, but you simply misinterpret us and think that we are just being aggressive. We tell you, ABA, the way you're doing these things are wrong. These are the wrong things. But whenever we say or point out a fault in ABA, you automatically go into defense mode and neglect what we say. You say, oh, that's old ABA. That's bad ABA. We do good ABA. So, no, you're the ones who are ignorant, not willing to collaborate. We point out faults, then you just go straight into defense mode. So clearly, you are not willing to collaborate. If you hear me, see this video, I'd be more than willing to have a conversation with you about ABA. The same with you, Mary Barbera. I'd have one with you. Because I actually would like to talk to an actual ABA therapist about this.
No, it doesn't. And I talk in my new book, Turn Autism Around, about Dr. Ami Klin's research and his work. And I went to see him a few times, and I actually did a solo show on the work of Ami Klin. And I was at a lecture, I think in 2019 with him, and I asked a question. I'm like, do you think you can prevent autism? And he said, no, based on his work, he does not believe you can prevent autism. But he said, based on his research, he is really certain that you can prevent and reverse speech delays and disorders, behavioral disorders, and intellectual disability that will often come with severe autism if it's not treated early enough and intensively enough. And so
not done intensely enough. Tamika, that's one of the parts we've been telling you. Stop making children do 40 hours intensive behavioral therapy. 40 hours a week, Tamika, is the length of a full-time job. And you're doing that to 5-year-olds. Then they've got all of their school week on top of that 40 hours. Don't you realise how dangerous that is? Of course you don't, because you don't include biology. You don't include physiology in the field. You don't include the other science disciplines about the human experience. So of course you don't know. So there you go. There's a fault. Please explain to me. How is it acceptable making kids do 40 hours of work on top of all their time at school? Please explain how it's acceptable to make a 5-year-old do that.
That's really the goal. I mean, my son, Lucas, is 25. He has moderate to severe autism, intellectual disability, speech disorder, and behavioral disorder. And I did very intensive ABA starting at the age of 3 1/4. Had I started it earlier at 21 months when my husband first mentioned it, would his life be different? I do believe it would. Nobody has a crystal ball to look backwards.
Right. None of us know.
That's not ruining my life. And
Right.
Lucas it's not, it's not a problem, but when people say
not ruining the life, how is damaging someone's health, damaging the nervous system? Just because you don't say damage at the minute doesn't mean no damage has been done. This is another thing so blind about them. They don't seem to care about the long run, which I find very dehumanizing and devaluing, because we seem to see it as important to find out the long-term results of things like, say, being infected by COVID-19, by coronavirus. If we see that as important, why shouldn't we see the long-term effects of things like ABA as important? Why shouldn't that be seen as important? Clearly, because you're doing it to autistic kids, and ABA defines autistic kids as not even humans. Yes, that's precisely what Oliver Loeb has said. We are just the raw materials that need to be constructed into a person. We are not a person who needs to develop, but we like little Lego pieces that need to be put together. So, of course, you don't care about the long-term results. as it's all about the money.
Say ABA is abuse.
Right.
I'm sorry, but I do not agree. I'm not even sorry. I don't agree. And you have a website that's iloveaba.com. So obviously you don't agree either, but there is good ABA and bad ABA.
100%.
So how do parents and professionals, this is also a problem for therapists, new BCBAs.
Yes, it is.
So I just turned 30, and naturally this has come with lots and lots of self-reflection.
You know, they get trapped in these jobs that are doing quote unquote bad ABA that
100%.
I would think is bad ABA. So what's the difference? How can you tell?
I think for any, let's start with parents. So for any parent or caregiver, if you are trying to determine a quality place for your child to receive services, you really have to start by looking at what's the goal of intervention. I really feel like that's like the foundational first step, because if you are speaking with a company or a provider and they're talking about, you know, we're going to fix this, we're going to correct blank, we're going to make your child more, we're going to, you know, remove stigma, like words like that, all of those words are getting at normalizing. All of those words, which again should not be the goal. The goal should not be we're going to magically make it as if you were born differently. The goal should be we're going to give you as many supports as you need so that you can contact the things you need to contact in life. You can let people know when you want food. You can go out and use a bathroom. You can attend school, you know, because in certain parts of the world with an autism diagnosis, you can't even go to school. So we really have to kind of look at what this means for that individual and how it's kind of making barriers to being able to do different things in their life. And then we address each barrier one by one. That should be the.
But what are the barriers that these guys are talking about these therapists? The bars they're referring to is basically things which are stopping us developing in the same way as non-autistic people. So they still are aiming for normalcy. You're claiming, oh, such as we heard Mary Barbera talk about catching up, you know, catching up with speech and catching up with this, catch up with that. So rather than allowing us to develop naturally at our own pace, but they're still trying to make us develop at a faster pace than our natural. And that's going to put a lot of pressure and damage biologically. And it's going to cause suppressed autonomy and so on because of the conditional acceptance. So you found that these two are not overcoming much of the controversy and the problems with behaviorism. If we take their reward systems as an example, all these reward systems, these bribes, they communicate across to the kids a particular message. And I think it's quite disgraceful of parents to ignore that their behavior is communication as well. If you only show love and affection to a child when the child does what you say, what do you think that behavior is communicating to them? It is saying, I will only love you, I will only show you affection or any attention if you jump through my hoops, if you do what I want you to do. I don't love you for who you are. So stop being yourself. Be who I want you to be if you want to be loved by me. That's precisely what it communicates across. That's the message that gets sent to so many children. So they're going to suppress their autonomy, suppress their free will to be what these people want them to be in order to be loved. This is why it's resulted in numerous suicidal behavior, because even all the way back in the 1940s, the psychologists were saying people who are not loved, who feel like they don't belong in this world, are much more likely to commit suicide. So treating autistic kids like they don't belong here with planned ignorance, extinction, bribing them, threatening them as a method, manipulating them, that's not communicating anything good across.
The goal. We're going to help your child do blank. We're going to make it easier for your child to do blank. That should be the kind of language that is being said by a provider, by a company. And I can definitely say I know of companies and providers in my area where that is not the language where that parents are hearing, and that should be a red flag. It should be very.
There you go, just a confession right there. That it should immediately be sounded as a red flag. So when autistic people say that ABA is abuse, precisely, she's just confessed that people get abused with ABA. The confession right there of what autistic people are saying is happening. And we're saying, you've got to put a stop to this. So what's taking you so long? It's not difficult to put a stop to it. You know, you've got your BCBA, the leadership board. It's called a leadership board because it's meant to lead. So it should be leading all the ABA clinics to doing it the right way. But remember, ABA is a cult that people are forced to swallow their objections. It's either swallow your objections or resign. In comment sections of videos about ABA, I've found numerous former therapists who resigned instead of just swallowed their objections, but they resigned, joined onto the sides of the autistic community and protest against ABA and behaviorism. So I've got the confession right there.
Very, very concerning when you are contacting a provider saying we need help, and that provider is instead telling you, here's what we're going to do. And they're not listening to you, and they're not taking your input, and they're just saying, oh, yeah, we know what to do. We know autistic kids. Here's the protocol. Here's the strategy. No, that is not how that should work. Absolutely not.
Okay, so language is one thing when you're interviewing companies.
Absolutely.
But people can talk the talk, but not do the right thing either. So if you are observing a classroom, and with COVID, sometimes you can't even observe classrooms now. But say the world is opened up and you can observe the classroom or speak to the teacher. What kinds of things would you recommend looking for? I know I actually have a couple things we're going to link in the show notes. I have a Myths and Truths about ABA podcast, and I also have a is school versus home ABA.
Mm-hmm. Which one's better? Mm-hmm.
And that sort of thing. So I have those two resources. We'll link them in the show notes. But say you are going to evaluate, we can talk about the differences between clinic and home and school. But say you are going into a clinic or a school to interview, to look around, what kind of things would you look to see that it would indicate better therapy?
Well, there are some settings that don't even allow parents to do that. So I feel like we need to start there. If you can't even go in and take a look, that's a problem.
Well, and now some people are blaming it on COVID.
Oh, I mean, prior to COVID.
Yeah, right. But prior to
COVID, policy that you can't go in.
Yeah, because it violates other kids' rights to their.
Yeah, they'll come up with all kinds of reasons. But it's just, how can you evaluate something if you never see it? Is kind of where my mind goes.
And it would really be heartbreaking to send my child on a special needs bus to.
I mean, can you imagine? And you've never been in the doors? I just. Yeah, so that should be a big waving red flag. But let's assume it's a place that lets you come in. So you should be looking for the strategies, the goals, and the reinforcement that you already agreed to.
Reinforcement. There's one of the problems right there. So, Tamika, listen. The problem with rewards is the more you reward them to reinforce it, not the more inclined they become to do the behaviour. They do it for the reward. That's why they're doing it. You then do your fading, but as you're doing this fading, you are terminating intrinsic motivation. Now, I have a question for you. If your ABA is so professional and effective, why is it that the vast majority of people who go through ABA do not become anywhere near independent but remain with their parents or are sent into care homes? They went through ABA. So why is that? I thought you said it was successful. So there's a question for you to ponder. But remember, your ABA, your so-called evidence-based, has not done any longitudinal studies. Please share with me the longitudinal studies that your organisation, that your clinic has done. I would love to see it. If we carry on.
As part of your child's treatment, it should not be a surprise when you go to observe and you say, I don't remember that we said we were going to work on eye contact, or I think I already told you I don't want you using edible reinforcers. There shouldn't be little surprise moments like that, because every part of the intervention should have that caregiver involvement and caregiver consent. So if you don't know what your child is working on at the center, in the classroom, at the facility, they're using strategies or techniques that you feel uncomfortable with, you didn't agree to, you don't feel like they are right for your child, and you've said that and they're using them anyway, these are all red flags that you are not dealing with a quality setting, a quality provider. If you are having issues talking to the person who is designing the treatment, whether that's the BCBA, the program supervisor, but you're not being heard. Your considerations are not being taken. If you say, I don't want you using this strategy with my child, they're using it anyway. That's a problem. These are things that parents absolutely can see and recognize, even if they're saying something different. With your own eyes, you can see that it's not the case. You can see that it's not happening and that you're not being heard.
And I think a lot of parents, when they're just trying to evaluate a setting, they don't know what they're supposed to do. So they really want to trust the professionals to just do the right thing. And I mean, that's okay, as long as my ideas about like going in to see a placement, I don't care if you're talking about a regular daycare for a typical toddler, or whether you're talking about a special needs classroom, or whatever you're evaluating. My first thing is, I want to see positivity. I want to see happy children. I don't want to see, kids can tantrum and stuff, but
I want to see happy children. This is not the case with autistic kids, because research and evidence has shown on double empathy that non-autistic people, that includes non-autistic therapists, struggle to read the emotions of autistic kids. So an autistic kid might appear or sound angry, but from the autistic kid might be perfectly happy that way. It's shown that within seconds they just misread the emotions of autistic kids. But as we can see here, she doesn't know about double empathy. Neither of these two seem to do so. Otherwise, they would have been aware of that. As they confessed, they went into the field knowing nothing about autism. In their education, they don't get taught about disabilities themselves. But autism, you've got ADHD, Down syndrome, dyslexia, epilepsy, gastrointestinal problems, you've got dyspraxia, you've got numerous disabilities under this one umbrella. And all of us in ABA, they go thinking, oh, these rewards, these tasks are not dangerous. They go saying, so, oh no, it's not harming the child, so it's not dangerous. But they're not professionals in epilepsy, for example. They're not educated about it. But anyone who is educated about epilepsy and when they've got an epilepsy client, because don't forget, the parents may not be educated about epilepsy, right? Just may know about their child, but not necessarily the child's epilepsy, because as this woman's just said, leave it to the professionals. My dad did not just leave it to the professionals. My dad actually did his own research to find out for himself what's safe and what's not. For example, if I went through one of these therapies that we do today, if they cause me stress, cause me anxiety, cause me tiredness, which all happens in ABA, I will have epileptic attacks. That is therapists pulling epileptic seizure triggers, increasing the likelihood, increasing brain activity, that it'll send too much energy from one brain cell to another, that they will trigger an epileptic attack and cause brain damage. That they will actually kill numerous cells in the brain, especially if it's a generalized seizure. And I bet these people can't even explain all this about epilepsy, dyspraxia, Down syndrome. There's certain things that you shouldn't do to individuals with specific disabilities. So I think it would be more ethical if, say, we had someone who actually is educated about epilepsy to do a safety check on the actual plans of what they're planning on doing to the child. Actually have someone educated about their disabilities to do a safety check. Is it safe to do this to this disabled person? But no, they don't do that. They go pulling epileptic seizure triggers all the time. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Well, no, the truth is they don't know. And because they're not very educated about other scientific disciplines, they don't know about the damage in the nervous system. It's as if they've got no common sense.
And they will if that's their communication system.
During the tour, if you've got kids on the floor or screaming, or you have not even kids unhappy, you have negativity among
staff.
This is what happens when your kids get to the HelloFresh box before you do. Tonight we're having HelloFreshes, quick and easy.
Provider, stop that. I'm going to put the jump rope away if you don't share. I told you 5 times. Get in line. Stand with your, negative.
Yep.
I don't want my child in a negative environment. So that's number one for me. And then I also want, like in my online courses and my book, I want the parent to be the captain of the ship.
They should be. Yeah.
Maybe they don't start there, but after they,
I want the parent to be the captain of the ship. No, the individual, the child, should be the leader, should be the captain of the ship, not the parent. If the child doesn't want to do this task, you should not force them to do it. If it's not something they need to do. We've got to learn the difference between need and want. But these lot tend to aim for the wants, not needs. That they invade and disallow autistic kids autonomy. So it should be the autistic child leading, but if the autistic child is leading, it's not ABA, because that violates and is at conflict with the behaviorist framework. Because in behaviorism, if you look in any psychology textbook, you'll go find, if you look at the approaches and look at the behaviorist approach, it will tell you it is deterministic. Boris Frederick Skinner himself said free will and intrinsic motivation are just illusions to disguise the real causes of behavior. B.F. Skinner did not believe in free will. These are the foundation principles of behaviorism. It was Boris Frederick Skinner, Ivan Pavlov, and John Watson. Those 3 are the founders of the behaviorist approach, as done on ABA episode 1 in my playlist on ABA up to now. So it's like the ABA therapists don't even know what behaviorism is, since they're thinking it allows agency, but behaviorism is deterministic. It's on the opposite side. So just look it up yourself, look inside a psychology textbook, and you'll find behaviorism is deterministic. Doesn't believe in free will.
We've had a number of instances. Kelsey from podcast 3, we can link that in the show notes. She knew she needed ABA. She had a friend who was a BCBA. She's driving her child, 2.5-year-old, an hour away. A BCBA is working on colors when he's banging his head on hard surfaces 100 times a day, eloping from the clinic down the street,
Wow.
and doesn't have the ability to request things.
Yeah.
Takes my online course. She's like, hello, I don't think you should be working on colors.
Right.
This just illustrates their lack of education. They would know that they're running down the street and so on goes on because of unpredictability. They're making things unpredictable. That's why so many autistic people are resistant to change, because of the overwhelming anxiety. But as I've mentioned numerous times already, these lot do not regard the nervous system. But the microbiome, the nervous system, the gut and so on, has the gut-brain axis. And in autistic individuals, there's overactivation in the amygdala and with some underactivation. And your amygdala is your threat detector. So if the threat detector is underactive, what's that going to result in? They are not going to detect something as a threat. That's not going to happen. So they've got to activate the amygdala, but these guys don't get taught about the amygdala in ABA. That's not part of ABA education. So until you trigger, heighten, switch it on, the amygdala, that's it. But they are going to act fearless and just run out into the middle of a road. But switch it on, do the right kind of activities, be in the right kind of environment, the right settings, to make the environment fit the person, not the person fit the environment. That way, everything will flourish and the child will develop. So our these are basing it directly on the individual, ignoring what's going on around them, ignoring what's happening inside. That's why they've got no clue. How do we deal with these behaviours safely? So Tamika, actually look at some of the neurology, the neuroscience. Actually see what are the neurological differences we see. That might explain to you the reason autistic kids stim more actively is due to having less of a neurotransmitter called dopamine, because that results in understimulation. By being understimulated, they need to stim to stimulate themselves. It's not always because of anxiety. There's hundreds of physiological routes to each behavior. So if you're to ignore physiological routes when it's about behavior, that shows that you're going to have no understanding. And even Boris Frederick Skinner himself said that behaviorism is so limited because even though we can think about private events, as we call them, we don't have access to the tools in order to include the physiology. B.F. Skinner did not want to disregard the physiology of the human, but that's what ABA still does today. Boris Frederick Skinner was ahead of his time. We have found errors in his work, scientists have, but they've also found some parts which are creditable, which do deserve credit, such as his claim you should not ignore the physiology. But ABA therapists, the physiology doesn't matter, the neurology doesn't matter, the biology doesn't matter, the nervous system doesn't matter. You ever think nothing else about the human matters?
He said, you know what? We don't need your input. And if he comes back, he's going to need to wear a helmet to protect his head. It's like, why should a 2.5-year-old be banging his head?
Right.
She was kind of got kicked out all at the same time.
Wow.
And worked with him at home on her own with just my
Yeah.
online stuff. Like it's just, and this isn't like, I don't know where this place is, and I'm not saying that BCBA. I mean, we would both agree that that was an example of
Mhm.
quote unquote bad ABA.
Yes.
Not to say
Yes.
that person's bad. It's just the training and the lack of, you know, if that were me, whatever I was doing, even if I thought it was the best therapy I could provide as a seasoned behavior analyst, and if somebody came in and said, I've just been watching these other videos and I'm more comfortable with this. Can we
Right.
talk about it? I'd be like,
Right.
especially if the child
Absolutely.
wasn't doing well.
Right. Right.
I'm doing this at home with him and he's talking and he's requesting. Can we talk about it? I mean, that should just be, you know, automatic. If somebody says they're doing
It
something
should.
working,
It definitely should.
let's open
Yes.
our mind. It doesn't
Right.
have to be ABA.
And take the input of that caregiver who is the person who knows that
Right.
individual child the best. It's not me.
Right.
It's that caregiver. So if you are dealing with someone who won't even listen to what you're saying about your own child, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
I don't care what kind of credential they have. That's a problem.
Right. Right. So I think, you know, it also gives ABA, continues to give ABA a bad name in many
Agree.
circles.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on home versus a clinic ABA setting, especially for a newly diagnosed toddler?
I very much think that it is individualized. I don't think that there is one that is automatically better.
No, it's how she just said individualized. There you go. That's why they don't have evidence for their claims concerning their science. Because you can't go, you know, if you said individualized, but in psychology, you've got to do random group research designs. So since we don't even do random group research designs, how can we obtain objective evidence? If they're treating everyone as subjects, as they should do, they can only get subjective data, not objective data. So there's the evidence that no, this is not scientific.
Better than the other because it depends on what that individual child is working on, what their needs are. It depends on the commitment ability of the family. Yes. Because when you're talking about center-based, most of them, it's going to be intensive. So your child's going to be there all day, every day. How exactly are you going to learn what they're doing if you are at work all day and the child is at the center all day? You're not. And so essentially they're going to a place and learning skills and gaining all these abilities, and then they're coming home. And what I hear over and over again is, oh, we tried XYZ Center, but nothing changed at home. Everything at home was the same. The reason why that happens is there has to be intentional generalization from one environment to the other. And most of your kind of everyday working families, they don't have the availability to do that. And so in that case, I would say you probably need to start off with home-based. So you can at least learn this and learn what it is and learn how to do it at home. And then you can send them to a facility where now, okay.
Now here's a question. Why must it be done consistently if it successfully works in the long run? You know, why do we need to keep doing it again? And with her adjective, or adverb in this case, intensively. Why must it be so intense when we know that that intensity is what causes PTSD? And it's those out of the studies which shows anyone who goes through ABA is 86% more likely to develop PTSD. But those participants in the projects, in the studies, tended to have gone through more hours of ABA. The more hours of ABA they did, the more symptoms of PTSD they were showing. The fewer hours in ABA they did, They're the ones who came off as symptom free. So going and saying, 40 hours a week, then all of your schoolwork, clearly that is too much and will cause post-traumatic stress disorder. Because it will be traumatizing just exhausting someone that much.
Okay, now I know what you're doing during the day because I've been taught how to do these strategies myself. So it's very, very individualized. And I don't like to see families kind of shuttled into one or the other automatically. I don't think that's a good thing because there's pros and cons to both. And you kind of have to decide, like, what are your priorities? What's most important to you? And I can't make that decision for you. That's a family decision.
Yeah. And I think the other problem, and we have people from all over the world who are listening.
Oh, great.
This is how AI optimizes my schedule. So I have a project coming up. So I start by listing the project and then setting a deadline. Every task manager does that, but here's where it gets
great.
Is, lack of access to anything, like
to
not
anything.
Even to a BCBA in a clinic.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Like Kelsey, is driving an hour away and insurance is paying. And then you're like, it took me X amount of time to get in line, to get to the front of the line.
Yes.
And then sometimes clinics have the attitude, or even home programs. I mean, I've seen this happen at home too. It's not, just at clinics where it's like, hey, if you're going to be a problem, mom,
we have a waiting list of 200 families. We don't have to deal with this.
So you can just take your little ball and go home and take your little, like, I used to joke that like Lucas was cute enough. They just didn't want me at all. You can imagine me involved as the parent. It's like, what are you doing?
Right. And explain it and then show me the data of what you're doing.
But, there's lack of access and
yes.
And that's one of the reasons, the main reason why I am pursuing, why I wrote my new book, why I'm pursuing really teaching the parents, because like, as you said, they're the experts. They're also, they have the long-term,
they do.
Actually, no, there's numerous evidence, great evidence actually, that the parents are not the experts, but the autistic individuals speaking up are the experts. Let's take a quick revision and look over what parents have done. First of all, conversion therapy, and it resulted in suicide. Second of all, let's keep drugging our kids, and the kids were drugged to death. Parents killing their own kids once again. Filicide, such as the founder of Autism speaks, I just want to help my autistic daughter. Also, I'll drive her and myself off of the George Washington Bridge. Yeah, in 5 years, over 500 people in the US, autistic people, have been killed by their own families. So the parents were the experts there, really. All the drug and which I mentioned today out on the market, they're going and putting things down the kids' throats without medical supervision. I would say before you consume any kind of diets that you put your kids on, you should at least seek a dietitian, a nutritionist, someone who's actually got a speciality in that field. Don't just shove random things down your kids' throats. Just because something's natural, that does not mean it is safe to consume. Alcohol's natural, but is that safe for us to consume, or does it damage our health? So see, these diets cannot be taken for granted as safe, and so on. So that's more of a doing. Because the trauma, mental health disorders, by treating their kids this way, saying, oh no, you've got to be so-called normal. That's what the parents say. That's what the parents are after, besides the parents who've taken our side of the debate about ABA. It's what all the other scientists say, who work in alternative disciplines. Even though they don't work in ABA, they just look at it and they can say, how on earth can you ignore the nervous system? How can you ignore the autistic brain and the discoveries about it? How can you ignore all the hormones, the hormonal imbalances? How can you ignore all of the biological discoveries and differences we've seen in autistic kids? How can you ignore all of that and still claim to be the golden standard? How can you ignore the rest of psychology, such as biopsychology and so on, and claim you're experts? Precisely, they can't. They're very uneducated. Well, personally, from my personal belief, I actually believe they do have education, but for some reason they refuse to use that education and instead just go by ABA as it is a cult. It's probably why so many therapists do have objections, but they get told to swallow the objections because it's a cult. It's a business. It's more like a multi-level marketing. It's something like that, one of those pyramid schemes. So make sure you do check out the video Oliver Lovas, which I did, which will be in the playlist ABA. Let's carry on.
In mind, and whatever you learn, from a behavior analyst or from the materials that are on Tamika's blog or on my website and courses, whatever you learn, you can then reapply. Like I remember
100%.
who was featured in one of the podcasts, and Cody was a former client who gave me video permission and everything. And I remember her, like, I was still consulting with the family, and she's like, yeah, this went downhill. And I was like, almost going to call you. And then I was like, no, Mary would say, you have a problem. Demands are too high.
Oh, that's
Reinforcement's
awesome.
too low. So then I increase the reinforcement and turn it around myself.
That's how that should look. That's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's, something we can agree on. So whether you're doing it at home or in a clinic or a school, we're going to Tamika's advice, look for the right language, look for, yes, we are going to work with you, the mom or dad or family or caregiver. We are going to coordinate with you, even if it is a clinic all day. And, there's also families with multiple kids and moms at work and dads at work. And it's like, we can't just make the rule like home is best, assuming everybody has 2.5 kids and lives in the suburbs.
Right.
That's just not.
Which is not the case. Not the case.
Not the case. So one of the things I get questions all the time, like, how can I find a clinic that uses the verbal behavior approach, was my first book, or lately, where can I find a clinic or provider that knows the turn autism around approach? It's like, yeah, good luck with that. But what I do recommend, and I have looked at your blogs and believe that you have expertise with like the ABLES and the BB map and intraverbals and all the things that we talk about, because there is also a difference between traditional ABA that doesn't utilize Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior.
Correct.
And me being,
Notice of how many times they are mentioning the term behaviour. I can assure you all that the more times you'll hear the word behaviour appear or come out of someone's mouth in a discussion, the more inadequate that resource is for how to bring up children. Because the more it speaks about behaviour, the more it is saying we are only going to pay attention to what's on the surface. We don't care about what's going on beneath the surface. We only care about what we can see, what we can measure, and as the 7 dimensions of ABA claim, they will only acknowledge that which they can observe and measure, meaning they only acknowledge what they can see and measure with the naked eye. So since you can't measure someone's emotions, they do not acknowledge emotions in ABA. But that's at conflict with ABA, since they can't measure it, they can't observe it. they often misinterpret the emotions. So, no, if it's actually ABA, the actual 7 dimensions, no, you can't acknowledge an autistic child's emotions and still claim you're doing ABA.
So involved with verbal behavior and now the turn autism around approach, there's going to be very few people who are trained and knowledgeable about the turn autism around approach. But what I recommend people do is, if you are in Tampa, Florida, just search autism, ABA, verbal behavior.
So what these two are mentioning about their own approaches. So are they actually doing ABA, these two? When they're going and claiming, oh no, it's our own approach, it's my 10 autism around approach. That's not ABA. But that's what these therapists seem to do. They make up their own words and claim, no, this is ABA. But no, not according to the so-called science. According to the science, that's against ABA, as it's not deterministic. It's not observable. It's not measurable. So going and doing their own words when claiming, oh, we're doing ABA, that's just a lie altogether. That these therapists will claim, oh, we do good ABA. No, they're not even doing ABA.
Even VB map, because I'm very partial to the VB map, and then Tampa, Florida, and see what comes up.
Right.
If you're thinking of writing your will, did you know that Alzheimer's Society has a range of options to help? There are so many reasons that you...
Right.
Now, I have seen clinics or in schools where they use the BB map for diagnosis and for like the first evaluation, the first assessment, but then they still are working on things like eye contact and carrier phrases and things that I don't.
It's definitely still happening. Yeah.
But at least you have people with a base knowledge of, we're going to use verbal behavior. We're going to use motivation and pairing and manding, hopefully. And maybe we can, shape our behavior.
I have a confession right there. Oh, we're going to use extrinsic motivation. Reinforcers. We're not going to use intrinsic motivation. We're going to destroy that. Let's destroy that with extrinsic motivators. If you would like evidence of my claim that extrinsic motivators destroy intrinsic motivation, look up something called the self-determination theory, led by psychologist Richard Ryan, and see of how repetitively they are managing to replicate the results that they actually do group research designs. Their evidence is not based on one individual. It's not based on a sample size of one person, but is actually based on the sample size of significant up to thousands. Those sizes of in hundreds, about 100 people on each group. They'll say something like the self-determination theory goes something like this. They'll bring 100 kids in. They'll say, and randomly randomize them into, group A and group B. You could do. So you've got 50 kids in group A, 50 kids in group B. And I could say to them something like, say, here, see if you can solve this puzzle. Say that to grade A, to group A. And to group B, say, here's the reward you'll get. Or here's what you won't get if you solve this puzzle correctly. Or even worse, if you actually do solve this puzzle correctly rather than just try and solve it. If you say solve it correctly, here's the reward you'll get. You find that just about every single time. Those who are not expecting a reward, but those in group A, but were just asked to do a task, do far better and outperform the ones using extrinsic motivators. So extrinsic motivation is inferior compared to intrinsic motivation. And that's what they want to use. extrinsic motivators, reinforcers. But then what exactly do they use as reinforcers, you've got to ask? They confiscate from the children what the children want. Confiscate what the children like to do in life, so they can bribe the kids to reinforce what they want to reinforce. And notice it's always what they want to reinforce. Not what's good for the kids, but what they think would be a quality of life for the kid, rather than allowing the kids to choose for themselves. So that's already going against human autonomy. And why doesn't ABA even have a bioethics code? Why don't they have anything to protect kids biologically? So that shows more lack of ethics. I'll include a video in the description by two professionals from an alternative channel who talk about that matter. Because they're actually specialists in it. I'm not an ethical specialist, mate. So I'll include a video in the description about it by two ethical specialists.
Together to really, that's what I'm recommending, to find quality programs. And then you have to interview them, like you said, look for language, see if you can go into
you really do. And I completely understand, because there may be parents listening that are like, okay, there's 2 places in my local area and they both have wait lists and I'm supposed to interview them. Like, I understand how this sounds.
Yeah.
But like, when you consider that it's time and energy and effort that you cannot get back. You cannot get that time back that you spent at a not so great place, working on things that didn't matter, that weren't important, that did not really help the child on a kind of global comprehensive level. Like, it's so important to get this right. It is so important to put your energy and your time and your focus into things that are really going to help your child long term. Not just kind of, oh, he learned how to label 2 more animals this week. Okay, that's great, but he still doesn't sleep at night. And I've been telling you that for 6 months. Like, he does not sleep at night. When are we going to address?
They're never going to address it, actually. The things which cause the sleep problems and all these so-called symptoms are to do with the microbiome. But as said, ABA therapists are not interested in biology, physiology, neurology. So they don't know that as gut bacteria builds up, and it's going to be very common in our world today, considering all the processed foods that we have, all the artificial things put into our foods, it's going to cause additional gut bacteria to grow inside of our gut, rather than actually keep a balance of good and bad bacteria. So the bad bacteria overgrowing inside of us gradually. This is why more and more people are developing cancer and other illnesses, because in our guts and so on, it's the foods that we consume today, by all the artificial things we do to them, our food's not as fresh anymore as it used to be 30 years ago. But we're damaging our gut, and that's causing damage to the brain. That's affecting the rest of the body, but it's causing illnesses. And that's another reason why we are so dominant among our species today. Because of what we are consuming. We're not consuming fresh food. But when you look at the rest of wildlife, what they consume freshly. So I can safely assume that a lot of the problems are because of the gut altogether. And that's why I say this microbiome research is very promising. When I'm on Facebook, for example, I see a lot of advertisements about IBS, about things that clean the gut out, and then say it increases your mood, gives you a better mood. So if filling our gut with bacteria, that's bound to cause mental health disorders. It makes you able to sleep better. So if having a clean gut helps you sleep better, having an overprocessed one, too much bacteria in it, that's going to prevent sleep. So it would be better to address the physiological roots of what is causing this from the inside. But no, they're thinking everything is determined by the environment and nothing else. Just the environment.
stress that. Gotta get to the important, critical things that are happening on a daily basis and causing challenges, and not just a provider who's telling you, oh, here's what I think your child needs to work on because they're 3. Oh, they're 5, they need this. Oh, they're 7, they need this. Like, it has to be a conversation.
Yeah. And a big quote I say is, no therapy is better than bad therapy.
I agree.
And at the end of my book, in the last chapter, I say that, and I say, basically, if you made it through the whole book, no therapy is better than bad therapy. But the good news is, if you made it through my whole book, you now know how to provide
to work with your own child. Yeah.
While you look.
Absolutely.
No, it's once again of how she's saying my book. Well, if it's her book, it's her method. And ABA does not belong to her. So, still, they have not overcome autistic people's criticisms towards ABA. If they can't go twisting the rules of ABA, can't go twisting the principles of ABA, and still claim to be ABA. You found that the ones saying, oh, we do good ABA, it's people like these two who are twisting the rules, who are at conflict with ABA. You know, they do not actually do actual ABA. You know, they are twisting it because of their objections. You can't twist it and still be ABA.
Better. And I think we just all, and you've done a great job with your blog and your work of empowering parents to do the right thing, to look at the important things, sleep, feed, potty training. I've done blogs, podcasts on all of that. We can put all of the show notes. Your show notes are going to be very long with all these resources. But yeah, speaking of resources, so parents can follow you at iloveaba.com,
and there's tons and tons and tons of resources. There's a whole section of just resources. Nothing is a fee. You just download it, print it off, and use it, because I want people to understand this stuff. And I feel like when I was kind of very early newbie in this field, people really didn't understand what I did. And I feel like in 2021, I can almost say the same thing. Like, I encounter families on a regular basis who have no idea what this is, what it's supposed to be. They're just kind of handing me their child. And I don't want that. I want families to know, like, okay, I know this is what this should look like. And I know the ethical standards for your credential. And I know that I should be asking this question. That's what I want. I want to work with informed families who are going to say, you know, we're watching what you're doing, and we're watching your strategy, and we're reading your behavior plan because we know what to look for. I think that's amazing. I think all providers should want that. You should want accountability. If you really care about the work that you're doing, you should want the people you're serving to agree and to say yes. Tamika's is a great BCBA. We're very, you should want that. You know, so you shouldn't be afraid or intimidated or, angry because a family has questions for you. That's a good thing. They're invested. They're involved. They want to learn. I love when families ask me questions. I think it's great.
Yeah. I think it's great too. So I like to end. We will put iloveaba.com in the show notes, and you have a lot of great resources there, and people can contact you that website. And we'd like to end the same way. Part of my podcast goals are not to just help the kids, but to help parents and professionals be less stressed and lead happier lives. So do you have any stress reduction tips or stress management tools that you use?
If, like me, you suffer in silence and tend to bottle all your emotions up, then you know how bad it can be for your mental health. I personally don't like to
have, I guess I would say unique. I have a little bit of a unique perspective on the whole kind of professional burnout thing, which, is very big in the BCBA world. And we know in general, the ABA industry has a lot of turnover, a lot of kind of unhappiness, dissatisfaction. I feel like burnout requires your consent, is how I feel about that. And I think when you set boundaries and when you communicate what you need, I don't think you end up in situations where you need to have a daily self-care routine to make it through the week. And I've had positions before where I did need to do that, and all the bubble bath and scented candles in the world is not going to replace the need to work somewhere where you are respected and your boundaries aren't trampled on. So I feel like we need to do a better job of advocating for ourselves. We teach our clients to advocate, but sometimes we forget, oh, I also need to advocate, and I need to say, this is the amount of break I need. This is the amount of.
Well, Tamika, here's another question for you. Why do you teach us to self-advocate when in the long run, when we do self-advocate, you ignore us? So what was the point in teaching us to self-advocate when we're just going to be ignored of our experiences of ABA? The only reason you've ever changed a single thing in ABA is because of us. We had to make you make that change. But by speaking up in 1993 by Jim Sinclair, as he was just beginning to set the spark of with his 1993 article, Don't Mourn for Us, where he and a group of autistic people began speaking up, and they mentioned things like, I quote, when a parent says, I wish my child did not have autism, what they are actually saying is, I wish the autistic child I have did not exist. I wish I had another non-autistic child instead. This is what we hear when you mourn over our existence. This is what we hear when you pray for a cure, when you speak of your fondest hopes and dreams for us. This is what we know, that your greatest wish is that one day we would cease to be, and strangers you can love will move in behind our faces. End of quote. And yes, that's precisely what ABA says. So why teach us to self-advocate and then just ignore our advocacy? Why work with Autism Speaks, who disagree with the Autism Self-Advocacy Network and actually fight against it? So why are you working with organizations that are fighting against self-advocacy if you want to teach self-advocacy? Is it because those who you do teach self-advocacy to, when they actually advocate on their own behalf, you don't like what they have to say, but in the process you actually did hurt them? Precisely. That's why.
Amount of time off I need after X amount of time. Don't call me. Don't email me. I'm not responding. I don't work on the weekends. That's for my family. Like, we need to do a better job of setting our own boundaries to have a personal life and not trying to be everything to everyone at all times, because that's not possible. And you're just going to burn yourself out is what's going to happen.
I like that. Burnout needs your consent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better today.
This was fun.
Look forward to connecting in the future, maybe in person sometime. You've just been a real bright.
Mary and Tamika, if either of you have heard this and are open to a discussion, I'll willfully have a discussion with you, but you will have to come in with education, as the kind of questions I have for you will involve things like the biology, will involve things like your ignorance of the autistic brain, and it will actually have to be the actual ABA, not your twisted versions of it, but the ABA that autistic people are talking about. Notice that neither Mary nor Tamika addressed actual ABA and what the actual principles are. Notice that throughout the whole thing, they were just saying, oh, my version of it. So if these two have their own versions of it, doesn't that make it safe to assume that every clinic has their own version of ABA? So is ABA really even a thing? Or is it just random clinics of an industry running clinics by their own method to make money? As the autism industrial complex shows, as the history of the operation shows, as the evolution of what Elizabeth B. Torres says when she read the book in advance. Do you think all these other scientists are lying? I'll just read the blurb to Professor Alicia Broderick's book. It says on the back, I quote, "Autism, a concept that barely existed 75 years ago, currently feeds multiple, multi-billion-dollar a year global industries. In the autism industrial complex, how branding, marketing, and capital investment turned autism into big business. Alicia A. Broderick analyzes how we got from the 11 children first identified by Leo Connor in 1943 as autistic to the billion-dollar autism industries that are booming today. Broderick argues that within the autism industrial complex, AIC, almost anyone can capitalize on and profit from autism, and she also shows us how. The AIC has not always been there. It was built, conjured, created, manufactured, produced, not out of thin air, but out of ideologies, rhetorics, branding, business plans, policy lobbying, media saturation, capital investment, and the bodies of autistic people. Broderick excavates the 75-year-long history of the concept of autism and shows us how the AIC, and indeed autism today, can only be understood within capitalism itself. End of quote. Then Elizabeth B. Torres writes on the back, autism is at an inflection point today. We are poised for a paradigm shift in autism research, education, and therapies. This book initiates that shift and does so superbly. And someone called PhD Scott Dansforth says, I quote, notions I've only half wondered about this book, puts together so well, so clearly, and with such detail that the readers will experience either satisfaction because they knew something was awry here, or discomfort at the sheer scale of the problem. End of quote. Notice that neither of those two, the two professors at the end, neither of them work for ABA, but both of them, both the professors I'm looking, were like saying, but there's something awry about that. And concerning the capitalism, you could watch my video above about the Autism Investor Summit, which happens every single year. It does. So really, altogether, Maria and Tamika, they didn't overcome a single criticism autistic people have towards ABA. Yeah, they just replaced it with their own version of ABA. Yeah, no one can find the turning autism around method. That's not ABA. That's the turning autism around method. Something made up by Mary. So they can't go defending ABA and not do ABA. So this shows how weak their argument is of behaviorism. And as when I first quoted Elizabeth B. Torres, she said, we will remember ABA, Lovaas, and behaviorism in general, not as a science. Now, just to Mary and Tianka, if you ever do want to talk with me, to have a conversation, I'll be asking questions such as, how do you address the amygdala? How do you reduce its activation or increase the activation of it? I'll be asking, what do you do about the oxytocin inside autistic individuals? How do you deal with the lower levels of dopamine? I'll be asking, What about the imbalances that your techniques cause in the endocrine system? I'll be asking about the immune system. I'll be asking you things about the gut bacteria causing autonomic nervous system problems. I'll be asking you about things such as epilepsy, Down syndrome, the autism itself, and asking, why do you still not understand it? It's not severe autism, moderate autism, and mild. But they're just 3 levels of support needs, not severity levels. Such as autism's developmental, it's not static. So I really will question, concern all the biological matters. And don't forget to look in the description where you'll find 2 ethical specialists who specialize in ethics talking about the very same complaints I've got about why you're paying any attention to things like the physiology, biology, neurology. They've got the exact same concerns as me. So I'm afraid in your video, Mary, you didn't refute a single thing that autistic people complaining about in ABA. You just twisted it and said, oh, I use the turning autism around method. You didn't refute a single criticism towards ABA. You gave confessions in this video that I've just responded to, that there are bad ABA clinics. ABA, you know that the Judge Rottenberg Centre is part of the BCB, your leadership board, and that you praise them at all the Autism Investor Summits. Works at the Judge Rottenberg Centre mean electroconvulsive therapy is still part of ABA. Why are you leaving it to be part of ABA? Why not shut the Judge Rottenberg Centre down? Once again, because of the money. They make money out of it. That's what ABA is all about, always has been, and most likely always will be about. And that's why we demand withdrawal from ABA. If you've made it this far, I thank you for listening. If you have any comments about ABA or any questions you would like to ask me concerning my views and so on and my criticisms of ABA, please share them in the comments, as I will really appreciate it. Thank you.